They pleaded, they apologized. But their regrets came far too late, because when the Deathworlders lose someone, when Earth bleeds, we don't reply with treaties. We reply with warships. And by then, the sky was already full of them. The diplomatic breakdown station Aurora hung in the void like a jewel among the stars, its crystalline structure reflecting the light of 3 nearby suns. The massive diplomatic station had been built specifically for this moment, the first Galactic Peace Summit in over a century. Representatives from 12 major species had gathered to address the growing tensions that threatened to tear apart. The fragile piece of known space, Ambassador Sarah Chen, stood before the massive observation deck. Watching ships from across the galaxy dock at the station's numerous ports, each vessel told a story of its species' engineering philosophy. The graceful, flowing lines of Elvani ships suggested beings who valued beauty above all else. The geometric precision of crystalline Federation vessels spoke of mathematical perfection. The organic curves of Verdanian bioships showed a species in harmony with nature. And then there were the human ships. Functional, angular, with no aesthetic concerns beyond efficiency. Sarah sometimes wondered what other species thought when they saw humanity's vessels. Probably that humans were practical to a fault, lacking imagination or artistic vision. Only they knew the truth. "The delegations are taking their positions," said Captain Marcus Stone, approaching from behind. Sarah's military advisor was a tall man with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. His dress uniform bore the simple insignia of the Terran Defense Force. But Sarah knew the scars hidden beneath the fabric told stories of conflicts most diplomats never imagined. The main conference chamber was a marvel of engineering, with each delegation's section designed to accommodate their specific environmental needs. The aquatic Hydronians sat in sealed water-filled chambers, while the silicon-based rockfolk occupied heated platforms that maintained their optimal temperature. At the center of it all was the circular negotiation table. It's large enough to seat representatives from every attending species. "Hi, Chancellor." Vextari of the Zephyrian Empire commanded attention the moment he entered, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with metallic scales that shifted color with his emotions. Vextari was an imposing figure. His species had dominated 3 star systems through a combination of advanced technology and ruthless aggression. Behind him walked his entourage of military advisors, their ceremonial armor gleaming with conquest medals. "The Zephyrian delegation appears confident," Marcus observed quietly. Sarah nodded, studying the body language of the various delegates. The smaller species, particularly the peaceful Meadowlanders and the scholarly quiet folk, seemed nervous in Vextari's presence. They had good reason to be. Zephyrian expansion had been accelerating over the past decade, and their methods were becoming increasingly brutal. The session began with ceremonial addresses from each delegation. The Elvani spoke of beauty and harmony. The crystalline Federation emphasized logic and order. The Verdanians called for unity with nature. When Sarah's turn came, she kept her remarks simple. "Humanity believes in the power of cooperation," she said. "Eh?" Her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "We have learned that our greatest achievements come not from conquest, but from working together toward common goals. We are here to listen, to understand, and to help find solutions that serve everyone's interests." Several delegates nodded approvingly. Humans had built a reputation as fair mediators over the past 50 years, helping resolve dozens of minor disputes through patient negotiation and creative compromise. They were seen as harmless, lacking the military might of major powers, but possessing a useful talent for finding middle ground. Vextari's scales shifted to a deep red as he stood for his address. "The Zephyrian Empire acknowledges the sovereignty of all species within their rightful territories," he began, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that made his species' speech so distinctive. "However, we cannot ignore the inefficient use of valuable resources by lesser civilizations." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vextari continued, his scales now pulsing with aggressive orange patterns. 3 systems currently under the control of the Meadowlander Collective contain rare minerals essential for galactic technological advancement. These resources are being criminally underutilized by a species that lacks the capability for proper extraction and refinement. Elder Maestel of the Meadowlanders rose from his delegation section, his plant-like form trembling with emotion. High Chancellor, my people have inhabited those worlds for over 2,000 years. The minerals you speak of are integrated into our ecosystem. Their extraction would destroy our biosphere and cause the extinction of countless species. Acceptable? Losses Vextari replied without hesitation. The Zephyrian Empire is prepared to offer compensation for the voluntary relocation of your population to suitable worlds we will provide. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. The captain's hand moved unconsciously to where his weapon would normally rest, though the peace summit prohibited all arms. And if we refuse? Elder Mostel asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Vextari's scales shifted to a pattern that Sarah's cultural briefings had identified as predatory satisfaction. Then the Empire will be forced to take more direct action to secure these vital resources. We estimate that proper mining operations could begin within 6 months of system pacification. The word pacification hung in the air like a death sentence. Every delegate understood what it meant. The Zephyrians would exterminate the Meadowlanders and strip their worlds bare, just as they had done to the Singing Crystals of Harmony Station and the floating gardens of the Nimbus Collective. Admiral Korthval of the Crystalline Federation activated his translation matrix with sharp, precise movements. High Chancellor, the Federation cannot support actions that result in the elimination of sentient species. Such behavior violates the fundamental principles of galactic civilization. Your principles are weaknesses, Vextari responded, his scales now showing active combat patterns. It's a strong take what they need from the weak. This is the natural order. Sarah stood slowly, drawing attention to herself. High Chancellor, surely there must be alternative solutions we can explore. Perhaps a joint development program that preserves the Meadowlander ecosystem while providing the Empire with the resources it needs. Vextari's attention focused on her with predatory intensity. Ambassador Chen, humanity's reputation for creative problem-solving is well known. However, some problems have only one solution. The Meadowlanders will surrender their systems or they will be removed. That sounds like a threat, Marcus said quietly, but his words carried clearly in the chambers. Acoustics. It is a statement of fact, Vextari replied. Just as it is a fact that humanity lacks the military capability to interfere with Zephyrian policy. Your species controls exactly 3 minor star systems and maintains a defense force suitable only for anti-piracy operations. You are mediators because you are too weak to be conquerors. The insult was deliberate and cutting. Sarah felt the eyes of every delegate on her, waiting to see how the human representative would respond to such blatant dismissal. She remained calm, but beside her, Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. High Chancellor, Sarah said evenly. Strength comes in many forms. Yes, humanity prefers negotiation to violence. We believe that lasting peace serves everyone's interests better than temporary conquest. But that preference for peace should not be mistaken for inability to act when necessary. Vextari's laugh was a harsh sound that sent chills through several of the more sensitive species. Ambassador, your words carry no weight without force to back them. The Meadowlanders have 7 standard days to begin evacuation procedures. After that time, the Empire will enforce compliance through whatever means necessary. Elder Mastal collapsed back into his organic seat, his form literally wilting with despair. The other smaller species delegates exchanged worried glances, clearly wondering if they would be next on the Zephorian expansion list. Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing fear in every face except those of the Zephorian delegation. These beings had come here hoping for peace, for protection, for some guarantee that their civilizations would be allowed to exist. Instead, they had been given an ultimatum by a species that viewed their existence as an inconvenience.
High Chancellor?
Sarah said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several delegates look up sharply. I need to be absolutely clear about your position. You are announcing your intention to commit genocide against the Meadowlander species in order to secure mineral resources. You are doing this despite knowing that alternative solutions exist. and you are explicitly rejecting any attempt at negotiated compromise. Is this correct? Your summary is accurate, Vextari confirmed, his scales showing satisfaction at having stated his intentions so clearly. Sarah nodded slowly. Then I have one final question. Are you absolutely certain that this is the course of action you wish to pursue? The Zephyrian Empire does not make idle threats, Ambassador. Our decision is final. Sarah stood silent for a long moment, and something in her stillness made the chamber grow quiet. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tone that made several delegates unconsciously move away from her.
Chancellor Vextari.
I hereby formally notify you that the Terran Federation considers your stated intentions to constitute an act of genocide against a sentient species. Such actions are fundamentally incompatible with galactic peace and stability. Vextari's scales shifted to an amused green. And what does humanity propose to do about it, Ambassador? A diplomatic protest? Sarah's smile was perfectly calm, but Marcus recognized the expression. He had seen it before, in combat zones where the enemy had made a fatal mistake. No, High Chancellor, Sarah replied. We're going to stop you. The laughter that erupted from the Zephyrian delegation was loud and mocking. Vextari's scales cycled through patterns of derision and contempt. Ambassador Chen, perhaps your translation systems are malfunctioning? Did you just threaten the Zephyrian Empire with military action? Not a threat, Sarah said quietly. Statement of fact. Just as you explained your intentions clearly, I am explaining ours. The Terran Federation will not permit the genocide of the Meadowlander species. With what army? Vextari demanded, his scales now showing genuine amusement. Humanity maintains fewer than 50 military vessels, none larger than a light cruiser. The Empire could eliminate your entire defense force in a single engagement. Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. High Chancellor, Sarah said, I think you may have received some inaccurate intelligence about humanity's capabilities. Impossible. Our scouts have surveyed your systems extensively. Your military consists of converted merchant vessels and patrol boats suitable only for police actions. That would be the ships we allow you to see, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since the conversation began. Did you really think a species that survived on a death world would be foolish enough to reveal our true military capacity to potential enemies? The chamber fell deadly silent. Vextari's scales flickered through confused patterns as he processed this information. You are bluffing, he declared finally. No species maintains hidden fleets. The cost would be prohibitive. Sarah's expression remained perfectly calm. High Chancellor, you have 7 standard days to reconsider your position regarding the Meadowlander systems. I strongly suggest you use that time wisely. The formal session ended in chaos as delegates rushed to contact their home governments. The Zephyrian delegation stormed out, Vextari's scales blazing with fury at what he perceived as an insult from an inferior species. As the chamber emptied, Elder Mostel approached the human delegation. With hesitant steps, Ambassador Chen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My people are grateful for your support, but we fear the consequences of this confrontation. The Zephyrians are not known for accepting challenges to their authority. Sarah placed a gentle hand on the Elder's arm. Elder Mostel, I want you to send a message to your people. Tell them to remain calm and continue their normal activities. Tell them that humanity keeps its promises. As the Elder departed, Marcus turned to Sarah with a grim smile. That could have gone better. Actually, Sarah replied, watching the last of the alien delegates file out, it went exactly as expected. They've shown their true nature in front of the entire galactic community. Now everyone knows what we're dealing with. And now everyone will see what we're capable of, Marcus added. Sarah nodded, already composing the encrypted message she would send to Earth. The Zephyrians had made their choice. They had rejected mercy, dismissed diplomacy, and threatened genocide against innocents. They were about to learn why humanity had earned the respect of every predator on Earth, and why even the most dangerous creatures on a death world had learned to fear the quiet, clever apes who preferred to talk, but never forgot how to hunt. The Zephyrian Empire wanted war. The Deathworlders would give them exactly what they asked for, the human. Response? The encrypted quantum burst transmission reached Earth Defense Command exactly 18 hours after the diplomatic summit's collapse. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the war room beneath the Andes Mountains, reading the message for the third time while around her. The most secure military facility in human space hummed with sudden activity. 7 days, she said aloud, her voice carrying across the massive command center. Sarah's bought us 7 days before the Zephyrians move against the Meadowlanders. Commander Jake Morrison looked up from the tactical display he was updating. More than enough time, Admiral. The fleet's been on standby since the summit began. We can have the first wave deployed within 48 hours. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the Defense Force's chief strategist, moved between holographic displays with practiced efficiency. Admiral, I've run the scenarios multiple times. The Zephyrians will likely interpret our intervention as a desperate bluff. Their intelligence on our capabilities is approximately 40 years out of date. Alina smiled grimly. That obsolete intelligence was no accident. For 4 decades, humanity had pursued a careful policy of strategic deception, while publicly maintaining only a modest defense force suitable for peacekeeping and anti-piracy operations. They had secretly developed the most advanced military technology in known space. The inspiration had come from Earth's own history. During the Second World War, the Allies had created elaborate deceptions to hide their true strength and intentions. Operation Bodyguard had convinced the Germans that the D-Day landings would occur at Calais rather than Normandy. Operation Mincemeat had used a corpse with false documents to mislead enemy intelligence. Humanity had applied these lessons on a galactic scale. Every alien scout that entered human space was carefully shepherded through predetermined routes where they would observe only what humans wanted them to see. Converted freighters posed as military vessels while true warships remained hidden in the outer dark between stars. Their energy signatures masked by advanced stealth technology. Show me the current fleet disposition, Alina commanded, the Central. Holograms shifted to display the Sol system and surrounding space. Immediately visible were the 43 vessels that comprised humanity's official defense force. These ships were real and functional, but they represented less than 5% of humanity's actual military capability. Now show me everything, Alina said quietly. The display transformed. Hundreds of new contacts appeared throughout human, space, and beyond. Battle cruisers lurked in the asteroid belts of uninhabited systems. Carrier groups maintained position in deep space, their fighters ready for immediate deployment. Massive dreadnoughts waited in the shadows of gas giants, their crews trained to perfection and their weapons charged. Phase deployment as planned, Alina ordered. Mozambique's squadron will make the initial contact. Their ships are old enough to match Zephyrian expectations of our capabilities. But Captain Torres knows how to make obsolete hardware sing. Morrison nodded, already relaying orders through the quantum communication network. Admiral, the Zephyrians will likely send scouts to observe our response. Standard doctrine suggests they'll want to assess our strength before committing their main fleet. Let them look, Alina replied.
Dr. Tanaka?
Initiate protocol deception. Make sure our guests see exactly what we want them to see. Across human space, a carefully choreographed performance began. The ships that moved openly toward the Meadowlander systems were genuine military vessels, but they had been deliberately selected to appear weak and outdated. Their crews understood the role they were playing and the stakes involved. Meanwhile, true strength of humanity's war machine began its silent approach. Stealth ships that had been perfecting their craft in the void between galaxies moved like ghosts toward strategic positions. These vessels incorporated technology that most species wouldn't develop for another century. Their hulls were composites of materials that absorbed sensor scans rather than reflecting them. Their engines used controlled microsingularities that left virtually no energy signature. Captain Maria Santos commanded the stealth frigate Shadow Walker as it glided through Zephyrian patrol zones completely undetected. Her ship was one of 50 similar vessels, conducting reconnaissance deep in enemy territory. The intelligence they gathered would prove crucial in the coming conflict. Captain, reported Lieutenant Hayes from the sensor station, we're detecting massive fleet movements in the Zephyrian home system. It looks like they're assembling a substantial force. Santos studied the data flowing across her screens. The Zephyrians were mobilizing over 200 ships for what they clearly expected to be a demonstration of overwhelming force. They intended to crush both the Meadowlanders and any human forces that dared to interfere, sending a message to the entire galaxy about the consequences of opposing the Empire. "Transmit our findings to command via quantum burst," Santos ordered. "Maximum encryption, wide-spectrum scatter to avoid detection." Intelligence reached Admiral Vasquez within minutes. She studied the force composition with professional interest. The Zephyrians were bringing their newest and most powerful vessels, clearly intending to end any resistance quickly and decisively. "They're not taking any chances," Morrison observed. "That's enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds," Good Vasquez replied, surprising her staff. "The bigger the fleet, the more impressive our victory will be. Dr. Tanaka, are our psychological warfare specialists ready?" The strategist smiled. "Admiral, they've been looking forward to this opportunity for years. The Zephyrians have made themselves very unpopular with their previous conquests. We'll have significant support from species that want to see the Empire humbled." The human response began exactly 72 hours after the summit's collapse. The Mozambique squadron, consisting of 8 aging cruisers and 16 escort vessels, entered Meadowlander space with great fanfare. Every major news network in the galaxy carried footage of the small human fleet taking defensive positions around the threatened worlds. Admiral Korthfell, of the Crystalline Federation, sent a private message to Admiral Vasquez. "Alina, my old friend, I fear humanity is making a tragic mistake. The Zephyrian fleet approaching Meadowlander space outnumbers your forces 10 to 1. Please reconsider this course of action." Vasquez's reply was brief but revealing. "Admiral, sometimes the outcome of a battle is determined before the first shot is fired. Trust in human creativity." The Zephyrian response was swift and predictable. High Chancellor Vextari himself led the Imperial fleet into Meadowlander space, his massive dreadnought blazing with aggressive energy signatures that could be detected from 3 star systems away. Behind him came wave after wave of sleek warships, their hulls gleaming with conquest markings and their weapons arrays charged for battle. "Open a channel to the human commander," Vextari ordered as his fleet took position. Captain Torres of the human cruiser Defiance appeared on the Zephyrian command screens. The human officer was a weathered woman in her 50s, her uniform bearing the simple insignia of a ship captain. She looked entirely unremarkable compared to the imposing Zephyrian Chancellor. "Captain Torres," Vextari began, his scales showing contemptuous amusement. "You command a brave crew, but this gesture of defiance is futile. Withdraw your forces now, and the Empire will allow your safe passage back to human space." Alice smiled calmly. "High Chancellor, I appreciate your offer, but we'll be staying. These people are under human protection now." "Captain, perhaps you don't understand the situation. My fleet contains over 200 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts and 60 heavy cruisers. Your small flotilla cannot possibly stand against such forces." "You're probably right," Torres admitted cheerfully. "But High Chancellor, you're making the same mistake that many species have made throughout history. You're assuming that what you can see is all there is." Vextaria's scales flickered with confusion. "Explain yourself," Torres said, checking her chronometer. "In about 30 seconds, you're going to have company." The Zephyrian sensors detected them first. Massive energy signatures appearing from empty space as ships dropped their stealth fields simultaneously. The vessels that materialized around the Imperial fleet were unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. They were huge angular behemoths that looked more like floating weapons platforms than traditional spacecraft. "Impossible," whispered the Zephyrian sensor officer. "Sensors show 30-7... no 40-3... no. Over 60 unknown vessels of unprecedented size." The ships continued to appear as more stealth fields dropped. These were humanity's true warships, products of 4 decades of secret development, and incorporating technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The lead vessel alone massed 3 times more than Vextari's flagship. "High Chancellor Torres," continued conversationally, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Alina Vasquez of the Terran Defense Force." The new communication channel opened to reveal a woman whose presence commanded immediate attention. Admiral Vasquez wore a simple uniform, but her eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had learned patience through millennia of evolution. High Chancellor Vextari Vasquez said without preamble, "You have 30 minutes to withdraw your fleet from Metalander space. This is not a negotiation." Vextaria's scales blazed with fury. "Admiral, you may have hidden ships, but the Empire still outnumbers your forces. Our fleet contains over 200 vessels." "I know," Vasquez replied. "I've been counting." "Unfortunately for you, quantity doesn't always determine the outcome of a battle." To demonstrate her point, one of the human dreadnoughts fired a single shot from its primary weapon array. The beam that lanced across space was unlike any energy weapon the Zephyrians had ever seen. Instead of the elegant plasma streams favored by most galactic militaries, this was something far more brutal and effective. The target, Zephyrian heavy cruiser, simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris field, just empty space where a massive warship had been moments before. "The weapon you just witnessed," Vasquez explained calmly, "uses controlled antimatter containment with quantum field manipulation. We call it a disintegrator beam. Each of my capital ships carries 16 such weapons." The silence on the Zephyrian command channel was profound. Vextari's scales cycled through patterns of shock, fear, and growing rage. "How?" he demanded. "Our intelligence indicated that humanity possessed only primitive projectile weapons and basic energy systems." "Your intelligence was deliberately fed false information for over 40 years, Vasquez admitted. "We learned long ago that sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to convince potential enemies that you're not worth fighting. But when diplomacy fails and innocents are threatened, humans have other options." Dr. Tanaka's voice came through on a secondary channel, broadcasting on all frequencies so that news networks throughout the galaxy could pick up the transmission. "High Chancellor, humanity has always preferred peace to war. We believe that cooperation achieves better results than conquest. But we also learned something important during our evolution on Earth." "And what is that?" Vextari asked, though his voice suggested he no longer wanted to know the answer. "Predators who prey on the weak eventually encounter something stronger than themselves. Today, the Zephyrian Empire has encountered the human species. We are the apex predators of a death world, and we have spent 40 years preparing for this moment." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Zephyrian fleet ship commanders reported growing panic among their crews. The beings who had terrorized the galaxy for decades suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that was not afraid, not desperate, and not weak. "High Chancellor," Admiral Vasquez said, her voice carrying the tone of absolute authority, "you now have 25 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that time, we will assume hostile intent and respond accordingly." Vextari looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. For the first time in his military career, he saw doubt. In their eyes, the Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on crushing weaker species, but they had never faced an opponent that could make their most powerful ships disappear with a single shot. "This is not over," Vextari declared, but his scales were showing the subdued colors of retreat rather than the bright patterns of aggression. "No," Admiral Vasquez agreed. "It's not. But High Chancellor, when you return to your empire, I want you to deliver a message. Humanity has been watching your expansion for decades. We've seen what you did to the singing crystals, the Nimbus Collective, and 17 other species that couldn't defend themselves. Those actions have not been forgotten." As the Zephyrian fleet began its humiliating withdrawal, news of the confrontation spread throughout the galaxy at the speed of light. Species that had lived in fear of Zephyrian expansion suddenly saw hope for the first time in decades. But in the depths of human space, Admiral Vasquez was already planning the next phase of the operation. The Zephyrians would not accept this defeat quietly. They would return with reinforcements, probably within weeks. When they did, humanity would be ready to show the galaxy what happened when Deathworlders truly went to war. Victory and New Order. The Zephyrian Imperial Council convened an emergency session within hours of their fleet's withdrawal from Metalander space. The vast chamber beneath the capital city of Nexus Prime had witnessed many victories over the centuries, but never a defeat of such magnitude. High Chancellor Vextari stood before the assembled military leadership, his scales displaying the muted patterns of a warrior who had met his match. "The human fleet possesses capabilities far beyond our intelligence estimates," he reported, his voice carefully controlled, despite the humiliation burning through his consciousness. "Their weapons technology is at least 50 years ahead of our current systems. Their ships appeared from nowhere, suggesting stealth capabilities we cannot detect." War Leader Kethmern, eldest of the military council, shifted his massive bulk forward. "High Chancellor, are you suggesting that a species we considered barely worthy of notice has somehow developed superior technology?" "I am stating facts, War Leader. A single human vessel destroyed the cruiser Dominion with one shot. Complete molecular dissolution, no debris, no energy discharge detectable on our sensors. I've never seen anything like it." The council chamber erupted in angry discussions. The Zephyrian Empire had built its identity around military supremacy. The idea that humans, the supposedly weak mediators who had been denied Galactic Council membership, possessed superior weapons was almost impossible to accept. Emperor Thexmore spoke from his elevated throne, his ancient scales bearing the scars of 100 conquered worlds. "High Chancellor, explain to me how 43 human ships convinced 200 Imperial vessels to retreat without firing a shot." Vextari's scales flickered with the colors of bitter truth. "Your Majesty, they demonstrated that they could destroy our entire fleet with minimal effort. The psychological impact was ... significant." The Emperor's rage blazed across his scales in patterns that made the council chamber's air itself seemed to vibrate with danger. Unacceptable. "The Empire does not retreat from inferior species." War Leader Kethmern mobilized the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Imperial fleets. "We will crush these humans and make an example of their insolence, Your Majesty," Kethmern replied. "Carefully, that would commit over 800 vessels to a single campaign. Perhaps we should first attempt to understand the extent of human capabilities." "The extent of their capabilities," the Emperor hissed, "is irrelevant compared to the extent of Imperial determination. Launch the fleets. Destroy every human ship. Bombard their colonies and reduce their homeworld to radioactive ash. Let the galaxy remember what happens to those who humiliate the Empire." Meanwhile, in the Strategic Planning Center of Luna Station, Admiral Vasquez reviewed intelligence reports from across Zephyrian space with growing satisfaction. Dr. Tanaka's Psychological Warfare Division had exceeded all expectations. The news of humanity's intervention had spread throughout the galaxy, causing massive unrest in Zephyrian-controlled systems. Admiral reported Colonel David Kim from the intelligence section. "We're detecting slave uprisings in 7 Zephyrian systems. The survivors of the Singing Crystal civilization have begun organized resistance on their former worlds. The Nimbus Collective refugees are requesting military support for liberation operations." General Patricia Rodriguez, commander of the Terran Marine Corps, smiled grimly as she studied troop deployment charts. It seems the Empire's reputation for invincibility was the only thing keeping their conquered peoples in line. Once that reputation cracked, everything started falling apart. Vasquez nodded, but her expression remained serious. "Colonel Kim, what's the status of Zephyrian fleet movements?" 3 major battle groups are converging on human space, Kim reported. Total strength approximately 800 vessels, including their newest dreadnoughts and their entire strategic reserve. Emperor Thexmore is apparently betting everything on one massive offensive. "Perfect," Vasquez said, surprising. Her staff, "The bigger the fleet, the more devastating their defeat will appear to the rest of the galaxy. Dr. Tanaka, are our allies ready?" The strategist consulted her datapad with evident satisfaction. "Admiral, we have explicit support from 12 species and tacit backing from 23 others. The Crystalline Federation has agreed to provide logistic support, while the Verdanians are offering their bioships for medical evacuation duties. Even more importantly, former Zephyrian slave worlds are providing intelligence on Imperial fleet movements and strategic weaknesses. The pieces of humanity's grand strategy were falling into place exactly as planned." For 40 years, human diplomats had carefully cultivated relationships throughout the galaxy, always positioning themselves as helpful mediators and reliable allies. Species that had been conquered or threatened by the Zephyrians remembered every favor, every act of kindness, every moment when humans had chosen to help rather than exploit. Admiral interrupted Commander Morrison from the tactical section. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian Emperor himself. The main screen activated to reveal Emperor Thexmore in all his ancient fury. The ruler of the Zephyrian Empire was massive, even by his species standards, his scales bearing the accumulated scars of centuries of conquest. Behind him stood the symbols of a dozen destroyed civilizations, trophies of his empire's ruthless expansion. Admiral Vasquez, the Emperor began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have made a grave error in judgment. The Zephyrian Empire does not accept humiliation from lesser species. I am offering you one final opportunity to surrender unconditionally and submit to imperial justice. Vasquez studied the ancient tyrant with clinical interest. Your Majesty, I appreciate your offer, but humanity respectfully declines. We've already explained our position regarding the Meadowlander systems. Thexmore's scales blazed with fury, and you have chosen extinction. 800 Imperial vessels are approaching your pathetic colonies. Your species will serve as an example to any who dare oppose the Empire's will. 800 ships? Vasquez mused thoughtfully. That's quite an investment. I hope you won't regret committing so many resources to this operation. Regret? The Emperor's laughter was a sound like grinding metal. Admiral, your entire species controls 3 minor systems. We will obliterate your fleet and ours, and spend the next month reducing your worlds to cinders. Your Majesty, Vasquez replied calmly, you're making the same mistake your High Chancellor made. You're assuming that what you can see represents the full extent of human capabilities. Something in her tone made the Emperor pause. Explain yourself. Gladly. For 40 years, humanity has been preparing for this moment. We've studied your tactics, analyzed your weaknesses, and planned accordingly. The fleet you encountered at Meadowlander space was less than 10% of our actual military strength. The Emperor's scales flickered with uncertainty. Impossible. Our intelligence networks are extensive. We would have detected large-scale military construction. Not if we didn't want you to, Dr. Tanaka interjected, joining the conversation. Your Majesty, you've been observing human industrial capacity, as measured by our civilian infrastructure. What you failed to notice was the gradual expansion of our deep space manufacturing facilities over the past 4 decades. On cue, sensor. Operators throughout Zephyrian space began reporting impossible readings. Human ships were emerging from the void in every direction, appearing in systems that should have been empty. These weren't the relatively modest vessels that had confronted the Imperial fleet at Meadowlander space. These were true warships, massive constructions that dwarfed anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. War Phase 1 deployment complete, reported Commander Morrison. All primary battle groups are in position. Admiral Vasquez turned back to the Emperor, whose scales were now cycling through patterns of confusion and growing alarm. Your Majesty, humanity has constructed the largest military fleet in galactic history. We've done it quietly, efficiently, and with the full knowledge that someday we would need to use it against species like yours. The strategic genius of humanity's approach became clear as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human forces weren't simply responding to the Zephyrian offensive, they were simultaneously liberating every system the Empire had conquered over the past century. While the main Imperial fleet moved toward human space, smaller task forces struck at garrison worlds, supply depots, administrative centers throughout Zephyrian territory. General Rodriguez led the liberation of the former Singing Crystal homeworld personally. Her Marines, equipped with powered armor that incorporated lessons learned from Earth's most dangerous environments, moved through the crystal caverns with methodical precision. Zephyrian occupation forces, accustomed to terrorizing helpless civilians, found themselves facing soldiers who had trained for combat in conditions that would kill most sentient species. General, the civilian population is secure, reported Colonel Kim, as his troops established defensive perimeters around the refugee camps where the surviving crystals had been imprisoned. The Zephyrian garrison surrendered after minimal resistance. Rodriguez nodded, watching as medics from the Verdanian bioships began treating Crystal refugees who had been enslaved for decades. Colonel established communication with the Crystal leadership. Let them know they're free to rebuild their civilization. However they choose. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as human forces moved with clockwork precision to dismantle the Zephyrian Empire's infrastructure of oppression. Each liberation was broadcast live throughout the galaxy, showing species after species celebrating their freedom from imperial tyranny. The psychological impact was devastating to Zephyrian morale. For centuries, the Empire had maintained control through the belief that resistance was futile. Now, not only were their forces being systematically defeated, but their victims were rising up with human support to reclaim their stolen heritage. Emperor Thexmor watched his empire crumble in real time as his 800-ship armada approached the outer edge of human space. Every world he had conquered was in revolt.
Ow.
Every slave population was demanding freedom.
Ollie.
Every ally was reconsidering their allegiance to a power that suddenly appeared weak and vulnerable. Your Majesty, Admiral Vasquez said, her image still displayed on the Imperial flagship's screens, I'm going to make you an offer. Surrender now, submit to galactic justice for the crimes your empire has committed, and we'll ensure that your people are treated fairly during the transition to whatever government replaces your regime. The Emperor's response was pure rage. Never. The Empire will fight to the last ship, the last warrior, the last breath. I was afraid you'd say that, Vasquez replied with what sounded almost like genuine regret. The Battle of Sol began at 0347 Galactic Standard, time when the lead elements of the Zephyrian Armada encountered the outer defensive perimeter of human space. What they found waiting for them defied every assumption about human military capabilities. Captain Santos, now commanding the heavy cruiser Night Hunter, watched the enemy fleet approach on her tactical displays. Around her, the human defensive formations waited with the patience of apex predators who had chosen their ground carefully. Captain reported her, tactical officer, the Zephyrians are maintaining standard battle formation. They appear to be. Expecting conventional engagement, Santos smiled coldly. They're about to learn that humans don't fight conventional battles. The first phase of the engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes. Human ships equipped with the latest gravitational manipulation technology created localized space-time distortions that pulled Zephyrian vessels out of formation. Ships that had been carefully positioned to provide mutual support suddenly found themselves isolated and vulnerable. The second phase was devastation. Human weapons, incorporating technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics, began systematically destroying the Imperial fleet. The disintegrator beams that had shocked the Zephyrians at Metalander space were revealed to be merely the most visible of humanity's arsenal. Quantum torpedoes that could phase through shields and armor struck at the heart of enemy vessels. Nanite swarms released from human missile carriers began consuming Zephyrian hulls at the molecular level. Emperor Thexmor, watching his magnificent armada being torn apart like toys in the hands of an angry child, finally began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. These humans weren't simply another species with advanced weapons. They were something far more dangerous, beings who had evolved on a world where survival required becoming the ultimate predators. All units, he broadcast to his remaining ships, fall back to defensive formation around the flagship. We'll make our stand here, but there would be no glorious last stand. Human ships moved through the Zephyrian formation like sharks through a school of fish, their weapons striking with surgical precision. They didn't simply destroy enemy vessels. They disabled them systematically, capturing crews and equipment for intelligence purposes. Admiral Vasquez, commanding the operation from her flagship Determination, watched the battles progress with professional satisfaction. Dr. Tanaka began broadcasting surrender terms on all frequencies. Let's see if we can end this without complete annihilation. The surrender terms were simple and non-negotiable. The Zephyrian Empire would cease to exist as a political entity. All conquered territories would be returned to their original inhabitants or granted independence. Or criminals, including the Emperor and his council, would face trial before a galactic tribunal. The Zephyrian people themselves would be allowed to form a new government under international supervision. Emperor Thexmore's final transmission was brief and bitter. You have destroyed an empire that lasted for millennia. I hope you're prepared. For the consequences of such power, Your Majesty, Admiral Vasquez replied. Humanity has been preparing for those consequences since we first looked up at the stars. We understand that great power requires great responsibility. Unlike your empire, we intend to use our strength to protect the innocent rather than exploit them. The formal surrender ceremony took place on Luna Station 3 days later. Representatives from every species in the galaxy attended, either in person or via quantum communication link. The sight of Emperor Thexmore and his surviving council members submitting to galactic justice sent a clear message throughout known space. The age of conquest was over. Ambassador Sarah Chen, who had witnessed the first diplomatic breakdown that led to this moment, now found herself helping to draft the new galactic accords that would emerge from humanity's victory. The documents established principles that reflected human values, the right of all species to self-determination, the obligation of stronger powers to protect weaker ones, and the establishment of mechanisms for peaceful dispute resolution. Ambassador asked Elder Mostel of the Meadowlanders, what will humanity do now that it has revealed its true strength? Many species fear that you will simply replace the Zephyrians as galactic overlords. Sarah smiled, remembering the quiet conversation she'd had with Admiral Vasquez after the surrender ceremony. Elder, humanity learned something important during our evolution. The strongest predators are often the ones that can afford to be gentle. We prefer cooperation to conquest not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to choose. The new galactic order that emerged from the Zephyrian War reflected this philosophy. Humanity took its place as the galaxy's protector, but not its ruler. Human fleets patrolled the space lanes, ensuring that no species could threaten another with genocide or enslavement. Human diplomats mediated disputes, bringing the lessons learned on a death world to the peaceful resolution of interstellar conflicts. The Zephyrian people themselves, freed from the tyranny of their imperial system, proved to be intelligent and capable beings who had been corrupted by centuries of militaristic indoctrination. Under the guidance of the galactic community, they began the long process of rebuilding their civilization on foundations of cooperation rather than conquest. In the years that followed, children throughout the galaxy would learn the story of how the quiet species from the Death World had ended the Age of Empires. They would study humanity's patient preparation, their preference for diplomacy over violence, and their willingness to fight when fighting became necessary to protect the innocent. The galaxy had asked for mercy from the Deathworlders. Instead, they received something far more valuable: justice, protection, and the promise that never again would peaceful species live in fear of those who sought to exploit weakness. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the destruction of the Zephyrian fleet or the liberation of enslaved worlds. It was the transformation of a galaxy ruled by fear into one governed by hope, where strength served justice and the strong protected. The weak, the Deathworlders had spoken, and the universe listened.